Sunset paints Liberty Park gold. 72-year-old Pops Jenkins, a beloved veteran and retired teacher, peacefully feeds sparrows. Then Officer Carson arrives, aggressive, suspicious. Park's closed, he barks, ignoring the setting sun. He cuffs the gentle elder's frail wrists like common trash. But a hidden camera is rolling, and Carson has no idea the lifetime of resilience he just confronted, from Birmingham 63 to Vietnam, or the community firestorm about to erupt. He thought he saw trash, he never saw this coming. The late afternoon sun, a molten gold pouring through the leaves of the ancient willow, painted dappled patterns on Samuel Jenkins' face. 72 years had etched lines around his eyes, narratives of laughter and loss, but those eyes still held a clarity, a deep, knowing calm. He sat on his usual bench, the one worn smooth by countless occupants over decades, its wood softened like river stone. Beneath the sprawling canopy of the willow, a sentinel that had watched Cedar Falls grow from a railroad stop to a struggling Rust Belt town, Samuel, known universally as Pops, hummed a gospel tune, low and resonant, a private prayer carried on the breeze. He crumbled the heel of a rye bread loaf, scattering the pieces for the sparrows that hopped and darted around his worn leather shoes. They were bold, these little city birds, accustomed to his gentle presence. They reminded him of resilience, of finding sustenance in overlooked corners. He smiled, a genuine curve of his lips that reached his eyes, watching one particularly audacious bird snatch a large crumb right from his outstretched fingers. The air was warm, thick with the scent of cut grass and the distant murmur of traffic on Main Street. It was peaceful, the kind of peace he'd fought for, prayed for, and sometimes despaired of ever finding in its fullness. The crunch of heavy boots on the gravel path shattered the quiet harmony. Pops didn't need to look up immediately to know the sound. It wasn't the relaxed tread of a park stroller or the hurried steps of a jogger. This was the purposeful, authoritative stride of law enforcement. He continued humming, his gaze fixed on the sparrows, a lifetime of learned caution keeping his movements small, unthreatening. Officer Brett Carson stopped directly in front of the bench, blocking the golden light. His shadow fell long and sharp across Pops and the birds, which scattered in a flutter of wings. Carson was young, maybe late 20s, with a square jaw set in a perpetual clench and eyes the color of faded denim that seemed to see threat everywhere. He was built like a fire hydrant, solid and unyielding, his uniform crisp, his hand resting instinctively, almost casually on the taser holstered at his hip. Third-generation cop, the town whispered. His father had been chief, his grandfather a beat cop back when Cedar Falls still had mills belching smoke. The legacy hung on him like the polished badge on his chest. Parks closed after dusk, Carson barked. The words were clipped, devoid of preamble or courtesy. Not "excuse me, sir," or "evening." Just a declaration, an accusation already implied. Pops slowly raised his head, his gaze meeting Carson's without flinching. He offered a gentle smile, the kind honed by decades of dealing with suspicion, of disarming hostility with quiet dignity. "Evening, officer," he said, his voice raspy but steady, like stones smoothed in a riverbed. "Sun's still up, son. See there." He gestured with a slight nod towards the western horizon, where the sun remained a visible, fiery orb above the treeline. "Got a good few minutes yet before dusk truly settles." Carson's jaw tightened further. He shifted his weight, the leather of his duty belt creaking. He wasn't interested in celestial mechanics or the precise definition of dusk. He saw an old black man sitting alone in his park as the light faded. In his mental calculus, that equaled suspicious. "Doesn't matter what you think," Carson retorted, his voice hardening. "I'm telling you the park is closing. Time to move along." "Just feeding the birds, officer," Pops said, his tone still mild, patient. "Been coming to this bench near on 30 years. Never caused a lick of trouble." He held up the small, empty bread bag. "See? All done. Was just enjoying the last bit of warmth." Carson's eyes swept over Pops, taking in the worn but clean clothes, the neatly trimmed gray beard, the hands resting peacefully on his knees. He saw none of the markers of respectability that might have registered had Pops been white. He saw defiance in the old man's stillness, insolence in his calm replies. "I need to see some ID," Carson demanded. Pops sighed, a quiet exhalation of breath. Here it came, the inevitable escalation. He knew the script. "May I ask why, officer? Am I under suspicion of committing a crime?" He kept his voice level, respectful but firm. He taught civics. He knew his rights, even if asserting them often felt like walking through a minefield. Failure to obey a lawful order, Carson snapped, his hand moving from his taser to his radio. And loitering. This area is known for activity. He didn't specify what kind of activity. He didn't need to. The implication hung heavy in the air. Pops felt a familiar weariness settle deep in his bones, heavier than his 72 years. He'd seen this posture, heard this tone, countless times. Birmingham, 1963. Saigon, 1969. Returning home to segregated water fountains, 1971. Cedar Falls, just last year, watching young men from his mentorship program get stopped for fitting the description. The uniform changed, the face changed, but the look in the eyes often remained the same. Officer, with all due respect, Pops began, I am simply sitting on a park bench before sunset. I live just 3 blocks over. My name is Samuel Jenkins. Carson keyed his radio. Dispatch, Badger 3. Got a suspicious male, older black male, Liberty Park, Willow Tree Bench. Refusing to comply. Gonna need backup? He paused, listening to the crackle in his earpiece. All right, copy that. Proceeding, he turned back to Pops, his stance widening slightly. Put your hands behind your back. Pop's heart gave a painful lurch. Not again. Not like this. Not here, in his sanctuary under the branches of the old willow. He thought of his late wife, Martha, whose ashes were sealed in the small silver locket he wore under his shirt. We rise, it said. She'd given it to him when he came home from Vietnam, a promise and a prayer. He touched the slight bump beneath his cotton shirt, drawing strength from the memory of her fierce love. Officer, please, Pops said, his voice gaining a tremor despite his efforts. This isn't necessary. I haven't done anything wrong. I gave you an order. Carson shouted, his face reddening. He reached forward, grabbing Pop's thin arm. The grip was surprisingly strong, biting into the fragile skin above his elbow. Hey, leave him alone. The voice, sharp and indignant, cut through the tension. Both Pops and Carson turned. Standing near the edge of the clearing, phone held high, recording, was Leah Gwynn. A high school senior, whip-smart, president of the debate club and one of the kids Pops occasionally tutored in history. She had bright, intelligent eyes, currently narrowed in anger, and a cascade of dark hair pulled back in a ponytail. She'd been working on a photography project, capturing the changing light on the park's old statues when she heard Carson's raised voice. Carson glared at her. This is official police business, young lady. Move along or you'll be obstructing. You're harassing him. Leah shot back, her phone steady. He wasn't doing anything. I saw the whole thing. Carson hesitated for a split second, distracted by the phone, the unexpected witness. In that moment, Pops spoke again, his voice regaining its steadiness, finding an anchor in the young woman's courage. Officer, Pops said, looking Carson directly in the eye, his gaze unwavering. You want to verify who I am? Fine. Call Pastor Matthews. Cedar Falls Community Church. He'll vouch for me. Everyone in this town knows Samuel Jenkins. Carson scoffed, tightening his grip on Pop's arm. I don't need a preacher to tell me my job. He pulled harder, forcing Pops to rise awkwardly from the bench. The sparrows, sensing the finality of the disruption, flew up into the high branches of the willow, chirping their alarm. As Carson reached for his handcuffs, the metallic click echoing in the quiet park, Pop's weathered hands trembled, not from fear alone, but from a deep, simmering anger. The embers of old fires stirred anew. He felt the familiar weight of history pressing down, the ghosts of past injustices whispering in the rustling leaves of the willow tree. He closed his eyes for a brief moment, picturing Martha's smile, feeling the engraved words against his skin. We rise. Leah kept recording, her face a mask of fury and disbelief. The setting sun cast long shadows, turning the idyllic park scene into something stark and ominous. The sound of the handcuffs ratcheting shut around Pop's thin wrists was unnaturally loud, a punctuation mark on a sentence that had been written long before Officer Carson ever pinned on his badge. The cold metal of the handcuffs bit into Pop's wrists, a sensation chillingly familiar despite the intervening decades. As Carson steered him, none too gently, towards the waiting cruiser parked haphazardly on the grass verge, the world seemed to warp and shift. The scent of cut grass was suddenly overlaid with the acrid tang of smoke and fear. The chirping sparrows morphed into the screams of terrified children. The golden Ohio sunlight dissolved into the harsh glare of a Birmingham afternoon 60 years prior. Flashback, Birmingham, Alabama, 1963. He was 15, all gangly limbs and burgeoning awareness, clutching his little sister Clara's hand so tightly his knuckles were white. They stood pressed amongst the crowd near Kelly Ingram Park, the air thick with tension and the soaring verses of freedom songs. His father, Deacon Elijah Jenkins, stood tall beside them, his face grim but resolute. Then came the chaos. The guttural roar of police dogs straining at their leashes, the sharp commands slicing through the singing, and then the water. Fire hoses, wielded with brutal efficiency, unleashed torrents powerful enough to strip bark from trees. The water hit the demonstrators like a physical blow, sending bodies tumbling, pinning them against brick walls, tearing signs from their grasp. Sam saw Mrs. Abernathy, their choir director, flung backwards as if by an invisible giant. He felt Clara trembling beside him, her small fingers digging into his palm. He wanted to run, to hide, to disappear, but his father's hand clamped down on his shoulder, anchoring him. "Hold your head high, Samuel," Deacon Jenkins whispered, his voice fierce amidst the roar of the water and the shouts. "Don't let them see you break. But keep your eyes open. Watch. Remember." Sam watched. He saw the faces contorted in hate, the grim satisfaction on the faces of the men holding the hoses. He saw the quiet dignity of those who picked themselves up, soaked and bruised, only to face the onslaught again. He saw courage bloom in the face of terror. He saw the fire within, the unquenchable flame of resistance that water could not extinguish. That day seared itself into his soul, a defining moment where innocence shattered against the brutal wall of systemic hatred. Weeks later, the bombing of the 16th Street Baptist Church stole his bright-eyed cousin, Sarah, and cemented his understanding that the fight was not abstract, but deeply, devastatingly personal. The memory dissolved as the cruiser door slammed shut, jolting Pops back to the present. Cedar Falls, Ohio. Not Birmingham. But the echo resonated, a chilling harmonic across the years. He carried that fire within him ever since. It fueled him through his tour in Vietnam, wading through rice paddies under enemy fire, patching up wounded comrades, earning a Purple Heart for shrapnel wounds that still ached on damp days. He fought for a country that promised liberty and justice for all, only to return home to find those promises still rang hollow for men who looked like him. Back in Ohio, trying to use the GI Bill, he faced landlords who suddenly had no vacancies, employers who found him not the right fit, restaurants where he was seated near the kitchen or ignored altogether. The segregation wasn't enshrined in law like it had been down south, but it was woven into the fabric of daily life, subtle and insidious. He became a teacher. History. Civics. He poured his energy into the next generation, particularly the black and brown kids navigating the complexities of Cedar Falls, a town that prided itself on its Midwestern friendliness while systematically marginalizing its minority communities. He taught them about the Constitution, about the civil rights movement, about the long, arduous struggle for equality. He taught them how to speak up, how to know their rights, how to carry themselves with dignity even when faced with suspicion. He taught them, as his father taught him, to hold their heads high but keep their eyes open. He explained that in places like Cedar Falls, walking down the street, sitting on a park bench, driving a slightly older car, these could all be interpreted as suspicious if your skin wasn't the right shade. It was a curriculum born of bitter experience. Now, sitting in the back of the police cruiser, the plastic seat hard beneath him, the cage separating him from Carson a stark symbol of his current reality, Pops felt the weight of those lessons pressed down on him. He had become the lesson. He felt the familiar shape of the locket against his chest, warmed by his skin. "We rise." Martha had understood the fire within him. She, a nurse whose gentle hands had calmed fevered brows and whose sharp intellect had challenged complacency, had been his rock, his partner in the quiet, everyday resistance of building a life, raising a family, and nurturing a community in the face of persistent inequality. Losing her to cancer 5 years ago had been like losing a limb, an amputation of the soul. The locket, containing a pinch of her ashes, was his connection to her strength, her unwavering belief in their shared journey. Through the rear window, he saw Leah and Gwen still standing by the willow tree, phone down now, her expression a mixture of shock and resolve. He saw the ancient tree itself, its branches like sheltering arms, a silent witness. How many stories did that tree hold? Lovers' trysts and family picnics, yes, but also hushed conversations about escaping north, whispered warnings about sundown towns, perhaps even the unspeakable horror of a lynching in generations past. The tree endured. It remembered. Carson got behind the wheel, the engine rumbling to life. He glanced in the rearview mirror, his eyes meeting Pop's reflected gaze. There was no flicker of doubt or remorse in Carson's expression, only a kind of smug satisfaction. Job done. Suspicious element contained. As the cruiser pulled away from the curb, leaving Liberty Park and the lone figure of Leah and Gwyn behind, Pops closed his eyes again. The fire within him didn't rage like it did in his youth. It burned now with a low, steady heat. It was the heat of righteous anger, tempered by grief, fueled by memory, and sustained by an unyielding hope. He wasn't just Samuel Jenkins, retired teacher, widower, grandfather. He was a vessel of history, a link in a chain of struggle stretching back generations. Officer Carson thought he was just cuffing an old man who wouldn't move along. He had no idea who he had just arrested. He had no idea the roots that ran deep beneath that park bench, intertwined with the very roots of the ancient willow, drawing strength from the earth and reaching for the light. He had no idea about the fire he had just inadvertently stoked. The video hit TikTok like a lightning strike. Leah and Gwyn, fueled by adrenaline and outrage, had uploaded the clip almost immediately after the police cruiser disappeared from view. She hadn't added dramatic music or flashy edits, just the raw footage, Pops sitting peacefully, Carson's aggressive approach, the calm but firm refusal, the escalation, the handcuffs clicking onto frail wrists under the serene canopy of the willow tree. She tagged it simply, #Grandpa vs. Cop, #JusticeForPops, #Cedar Falls, Ohio, #racial profiling. By morning, it had exploded. Shared thousands, then tens of thousands, then hundreds of thousands of times. Comments flooded in, expressions of shock, anger, solidarity. People recognized the quiet dignity of the elderly man, the unwarranted aggression of the officer. The #JusticeForPops started trending nationally. Cedar Falls, Ohio, a town most Americans couldn't place on a map, was suddenly thrust into the harsh glare of the national spotlight. The basement fellowship hall of Cedar Falls Community Church buzzed with an energy that was equal parts fury and determination. Usually reserved for potlucks and Sunday school, the room was now packed. Folding chairs scraped against the linoleum floor as more people squeezed in. The air hummed with urgent whispers, the scent of stale coffee mingling with righteous indignation. At the front of the room stood Pastor Marcus Matthews, a man whose physical presence alone commanded attention. Tall and broad-shouldered, with skin the color of rich mahogany and a voice that could thunder like Jamaican surf or soothe like a lullaby, he surveyed the gathered crowd. His usual warm smile was replaced by a deep frown etched between his brows. Pastor Matthews wasn't just a spiritual leader. He was a community anchor, an immigrant who understood the precariousness of belonging, the constant need to prove oneself in a land that often viewed difference with suspicion. Pops Jenkins was not just a member of his congregation. He was a pillar, a mentor, a friend. Brothers and sisters, Pastor Matthews began, his voice resonating through the crowded room, silencing the murmurs. We are gathered here tonight with heavy hearts. Our brother, Samuel Jenkins, our Pops, a man of peace, a man who has served his country and this community with honor for decades, was arrested yesterday evening. Arrested for sitting on a park bench. He paused, letting the absurdity of the statement hang in the air. Arrested, it seems, for being black in public as the sun began to set. A low growl of anger rippled through the crowd. Leah, Pastor Matthews gestured towards the side where Leah and Gwyn stood nervously, clutching her phone. This brave young woman witnessed it. She recorded it. Because of her courage, the world is seeing what happened in our town, in our park. Applause broke out for Leah, who flushed but stood taller. Next to Leah stood Diego Ramirez, a lanky teenager with intense eyes and restless energy. A DACA recipient, Diego was a tireless activist, channeling the anxieties of his own family's precarious status into organizing for immigrant rights and against police harassment. He'd been one of Pop's men's, inspired by the older man's stories of the civil rights movement. Now, he stepped forward and connected a laptop to a projector. Thanks to Leah's video going viral, Diego said, his voice clear and strong, we started digging. We filed a public records request this morning for Officer Brett Carson's stop data. An image flashed onto the screen behind him, a stark spreadsheet. Pastor Matthews is right. This isn't just about Pops. Look at this. He pointed to a highlighted row. In the last 12 months, Officer Carson has initiated 156 pedestrian stops. Of those, 143, that's 92%, involved Black or Latino residents. In a town where we make up less than 30% of the population. Gasps and angry murmurs filled the hall. The numbers laid bare the pattern, the undeniable bias. It wasn't just a bad day or a misunderstanding. It was a practice. This is profiling, plain and simple, Diego declared. It's what my uncle faces every time he drives home from his construction job. It's what my friends get hassled for when they hang out downtown. And it's what happened to Pops. From the back of the room, a sharp, commanding voice cut through the noise. And it's illegal, and we're going to fight it. Raj Patel pushed his way forward. A former student of Pops Jenkins, Raj was now a successful civil rights attorney. His sharp suits and confident demeanor, a stark contrast to the shy teenager Pops remembered helping with college applications. Raj had driven straight from Columbus the moment he saw Leah's video and heard Pops had been arrested and charged with resisting arrest and failure to comply. I spoke with Pops this morning after he was released on bail, Raj announced, standing beside Pastor Matthews. He's shaken but resolute. He wants to fight this, not just for himself, but for everyone who's been unjustly targeted. I've already filed a notice of intent to sue Officer Carson, the Cedar Falls Police Department, and the City of Cedar Falls for wrongful arrest, excessive force, and violation of Mr. Jenkins' civil rights under the 4th and 14th Amendments. A wave of determined applause swept the room. The initial shock was coalescing into action. Committees were forming spontaneously, fundraising, outreach, protest planning. People were scribbling on notepads, exchanging numbers, finding purpose in the collective anger. Meanwhile, across town, in a neat suburban house on the newer side of Cedar Falls, another confrontation was brewing. Emily Carson, Brett's wife, stood in their pristine kitchen, her nurse's scrubs still on, her face pale with disbelief and anger. She'd just gotten off a long shift at Cedar Falls General, where she'd spent part of her morning checking the blood sugar levels and adjusting the insulin dosage for one of her favorite long-term diabetic patients. Samuel Jenkins. She'd heard the whispers at the nurse's station, seen the viral video link shared in a hospital group chat. Brett walked in, tossing his keys onto the granite countertop, radiating a weary self-importance. Rough day, he grunted, heading for the refrigerator. Brett. Emily's voice was low, trembling slightly. I saw the video. He stopped, beer halfway out of the fridge. Oh, that? Some punk kid twisting things. Old guy was refusing orders, getting belligerent. Belligerent. Emily echoed, her voice rising. Brett, that was Mr. Jenkins. Samuel Jenkins. My patient. Brett turned slowly, a flicker of surprise, then annoyance, crossing his face. You know him? Know him? Emily's composure cracked. He comes into the clinic every month. He tells me stories about his wife, asks about my kids, brings the nurses homemade cookies at Christmas. He served in Vietnam. He taught history at the high school for 30 years. He's Pops. Do you even know who you arrested? He was breaking the law, Brett insisted, his defensiveness kicking in. Park rules are park rules. Doesn't matter if he brings you cookies, park rules. Emily stepped closer, her eyes flashing. Or was it his skin color that made him suspicious? Did you even try talking to him like a human being before you put your hands on him? Did you see how old he is? How frail? He wouldn't comply, Em. What was I supposed to do? Brett's voice rose, matching hers. It's my job to enforce the law regardless of who it is. Is it also your job to assume the worst of every black man you see? Emily shot back. Is that what your father taught you? Is that the legacy you're so proud of? The question hung in the air, heavy and accusatory. Brett stared at his wife, seeing not just disagreement but a profound disappointment, a crack in the foundation of their shared life. He saw the spreadsheet Diego Ramirez had shown the church reflected in his wife's eyes, the 92%. He saw the viral video playing out, not as proof of his authority, but as evidence of his prejudice. He turned away, grabbing his beer and retreating towards the living room, unable to meet her gaze. You don't understand my job, he muttered, leaving Emily standing alone in the kitchen, tears welling in her eyes, the image of Pop's gentle face juxtaposed with the harsh click of handcuffs echoing in her mind. The uprising wasn't just happening in the church basement or on social media. It was beginning in living rooms, in workplaces, in the troubled conscience of a community forced to confront the ugliness hiding beneath its pleasant facade. The fire Pops carried within him had leaped, catching spark in the hearts of strangers and neighbors alike, fanned by the digital winds of Leah's video. Cedar Falls was waking up. The courtroom buzzed with a low, anxious energy. Every seat was filled. Supporters of Pops Jenkins, church members, former students, activists drawn by the national attention, packed one side. On the other, a smaller, grimmer contingent of police officers and their families sat stiffly, offering silent support for Brett Carson. Media lined the back walls, cameras poised, microphones ready. Cedar Falls hadn't seen a trial like this ever. Pop sat at the plaintiff's table beside Raj Patel, looking small but composed in his Sunday suit. The tremor in his hands was more noticeable under the harsh fluorescent lights, but his gaze was steady as he watched the proceedings. Across the aisle, Brett Carson sat with his lawyer, Frank Duffy, a slick, aggressive attorney known for defending police officers. Carson avoided looking towards Pops or the spectators, his jaw set, his eyes fixed on Judge Alicia Wu. Judge Wu, a respected jurist known for her sharp intellect and no-nonsense demeanor, surveyed the packed courtroom over her glasses. "Mr. Patel," she said, her voice cutting through the murmur, "you may call your first witness." "The plaintiff calls Samuel Jenkins to the stand," Raj announced clearly. A hush fell over the room as Pops slowly made his way to the witness stand. He took the oath, his voice quiet but firm, and settled into the chair. Raj approached him gently. "Mr. Jenkins," Raj began, his tone respectful, "please tell the court what happened on the evening of May 15th last year." Pops recounted the events calmly, factually. Feeding the sparrows, enjoying the last light under the willow tree, Officer Carson's sudden appearance, the demand to leave, the request for ID, the refusal to call Pastor Matthews, the arrest. He spoke without embellishment, his inherent dignity filling the courtroom. "Mr. Jenkins," Raj continued, "you've lived in Cedar Falls for over 40 years, correct? Taught history at the high school?" "Yes, sir." 32 years. "And you often visited Liberty Park?" "Almost every day, weather permitting. Especially since my wife, Martha, passed. That bench under the willow, it was our spot. Became mine after she was gone." His voice caught slightly on Martha's name. Officer Carson stated the park was closed after dusk. "Was the sun down when he approached you?" "No, sir. It was still visible above the trees. Plenty of light left." "Did Officer Carson seem interested in that fact?" "No, sir. He seemed decided. Like his mind was already made up about me." Raj paused, letting the words sink in. "Mr. Jenkins, this wasn't the first time you've encountered prejudice, was it?" "Objection." Duffy leaped to his feet. "Relevance? Counsel is trying to paint my client with the broad brush of historical grievance." "Your Honor," Raj countered smoothly, "Mr. Jenkins' life experiences are directly relevant to understanding his state of mind during the encounter, his perception of the officer's actions, and the resulting emotional distress caused by this unlawful arrest. It speaks to the pattern of bias Mr. Jenkins has faced, culminating in this incident." Judge Wu considered for a moment. "I'll allow it, but keep it focused, Mr. Patel. This isn't a history lesson." Raj nodded. "Mr. Jenkins, you grew up in Birmingham, Alabama during the Civil Rights Movement, did you not?" "Yes, sir." "I did. Can you tell the court about an event from that time that shaped your understanding of authority and injustice?" Pops took a deep breath, the courtroom fading as memory surged forward. "It was 1963, he began, his voice lowering, drawing everyone in. "We were marching for our rights. Just children, many of us. The police. They turned the fire hoses on us." He described the scene, the force of the water, the fear. And then, his voice thick with emotion, "A few weeks later, the church, 16th Street Baptist. They bombed it on a Sunday morning." He paused, swallowing hard. "My cousin, Sarah, she was one of the 4 little girls killed that day. Just getting ready for choir practice." A collective intake of breath swept the courtroom. Tears welled in the eyes of many spectators. "Objection." Duffy shouted again, his face flushed. "Your Honor, this is entirely prejudicial. What does a bombing 60 years ago have to do with my client telling Mr. Jenkins to leave a park after hours?" "Sustained," Judge Wu said firmly, though her own expression was somber. "Mr. Patel, move on. The jury will disregard the witness's last statement regarding the bombing." Raj nodded, having made his point nonetheless. The connection between past and present terror, however disallowed legally, resonated emotionally. He shifted gears. "Thank you, Mr. Jenkins. Now let's talk about Officer Carson's actions. Did you resist him?" "No, sir. I questioned why I was being arrested. I asked him to call my pastor. But I didn't fight him." "Did you threaten him in any way?" "Threaten him?" Pops looked genuinely bewildered. "Heavens, no. I'm 72 years old. I have arthritis. I was feeding birds." During cross-examination, Duffy was relentless. He hammered Pops on the exact time, the precise wording of the park ordinance, trying to paint him as deliberately obstinate, a troublemaker looking for confrontation. "Isn't it true, Mr. Jenkins, that you refused a lawful order?" Duffy pressed. "I questioned an order I believed was unlawful, sir," Pops corrected gently. "There's a difference. A difference. Officer Carson wasn't required to debate with you on a darkening path. He told you to leave, you didn't leave. Simple as that." Pops met his glare. "It wasn't simple, sir. Not for me. Not that day." Raj's next move was decisive. He submitted into evidence the text messages obtained from Carson's phone records. Projected onto the screen were messages Carson sent to another officer just minutes before encountering Pops. Heading to Liberty. Gonna clear out the usual trash before dark. Yeah, place gets sketchy when the sun goes down. Need to show presence. And then minutes before the official park closing time, got one here already. Old timer, won't move. Typical. Duffy objected vehemently, but Judge Wu allowed the texts, ruling them relevant to Carson's state of mind and potential bias. The word trash hung in the air, ugly and damning. Leah Nguyen testified next, recounting what she saw and recorded, her voice clear and unwavering despite Duffy's attempts to portray her as an attention-seeking teenager. Diego Ramirez followed, presenting the statistical data on Carson's stops again, explaining how the pattern affected the entire community, sharing stories of his uncle being pulled over repeatedly by Carson for routine checks. That felt anything but routine. He spoke of the chilling effect, the fear of driving or even walking in certain parts of town if you were Latino. During the lunch recess, a scene unfolded outside the courthouse that spoke volumes. A group of young people, organized by Diego, held signs, "Justice for Pops," "End Racial Profiling." Cedar Falls stands with Mr. Jenkins. Among them, holding a slightly hesitant sign, was Jake Carson, Brett's 16-year-old son. Brett Carson came out for air, saw his son, and strode over, his face thunderous. "Jake, what the hell are you doing here? Get that sign down. You're embarrassing us." Jake stood his ground, his face pale but determined. "I'm embarrassing you, Dad? You arrested Mr. Jenkins. Mr. Jenkins. He tutored me in history last year. He's a good man. What you did was wrong." "You don't understand," Brett sputtered, glancing around, aware of onlookers. "No, Dad. I think for the first time I do understand," Jake said, his voice quiet but firm. He looked at his father, then back at the sign he held. "This is where I need to be." Brett stared at his son, speechless, seeing not defiance but conviction. He saw the values he thought he represented reflected back at him, not in support but in judgment. He turned abruptly and stalked back into the courthouse, the shouts of the protesters ringing in his ears, his son's words echoing louder than any of them. The foundation he stood on felt increasingly unstable, crumbling not just under legal pressure, but under the weight of his own son's disappointment. The testimony wasn't just happening on the witness stand, it was unfolding on the streets, within families, forcing a reckoning that Cedar Falls could no longer avoid. The willow tree stood as it always had, vast and green, its long tendrils swaying gently in the summer breeze. But something was different. Beneath its sprawling branches, near the bench where Pops Jenkins still sat, a small, unassuming bronze plaque was now affixed to a modest stone marker. It read, "Liberty Park Willow, witness to our history, shelter for our community, in honor of those who persisted in the face of injustice. May its shade always shelter all God's children." 1 year had passed since the arrest that shook Cedar Falls. The lawsuit, bolstered by the text messages, the statistical data, and the powerful testimonies, had moved towards a settlement. Facing overwhelming evidence and mounting public pressure, Brett Carson had agreed to resign from the Cedar Falls Police Department as part of a plea deal that dropped the charges against Pops and avoided a protracted civil trial. He and his family had quietly moved out of state. The city, humbled and under scrutiny, had implemented significant changes. Mandatory, ongoing racial bias and de-escalation training was instituted for all officers. Body cameras, long debated and resisted, were now standard equipment, their blinking red lights a small but constant reminder of accountability. An independent civilian review board, something activists had demanded for years, was finally established. The changes weren't a magic bullet, Pops knew, but they were steps. Hard-won progress. Today, the park hummed with a different kind of energy than it had that fateful evening. Pops sat on his bench, not alone this time. On one side sat Leah Nguyen, home for the summer from her freshman year at Northwestern, where she was studying journalism. On the other sat Diego Ramirez, now a high school graduate, deferring college for a year to work as a community organizer. They had set up a small table nearby, adorned with voter registration forms and informational pamphlets about the upcoming local elections. "Got 3 more registered, Pops," Leah said, smiling as she tucked the forms into a folder. "Including Mrs. Gable from down the street. Said she hasn't voted in 20 years but feels like she needs to now." "That's good news, child," Pops nodded, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "Every voice matters. Took us a long time to secure that right. Can't ever take it for granted." Diego looked around at the diverse crowd gathered in the park, black, white, Latino, Asian, young, old. Families spread blankets on the grass, children chased pigeons, the Sparrows remained Pop's loyal constituency near the bench, and the Cedar Falls Community Church Choir was setting up near the plaque. It feels different now, doesn't it? Diego mused. Like people are actually seeing each other more. Change comes slow, son, Pops said softly. Sometimes feels like you take one step forward, get knocked 2 steps back. But you gotta keep pushing. Keep tending the garden. Roots grow deep even when you can't see them. Pastor Matthews stepped up to the stone marker, his presence drawing the scattered groups together. He raised his hands, his voice carrying easily across the lawn. Friends, neighbors, family, he began, his accent a warm blend of Jamaica and the Midwest. We gather today under the branches of this magnificent tree. A tree that has seen more history than any of us can fathom. It's seen seasons change, generations come and go. It's likely seen joy and sorrow, picnics and protests. Perhaps it's even witnessed the darkness of lynchings in days long past and the bright hope of freedom celebrations. He gestured towards the plaque. Today, we rededicate this space. We honor the persistence of men like Samuel Jenkins, and the courage of young people like Leah and Diego, and the collective spirit of a community that refused to stay silent. We acknowledge the pain of the past, but we commit ourselves to nurturing a future where this park, this town, truly offers shelter and belonging to all of God's children. He bowed his head. Let us pray for wisdom, for courage, for justice that flows like a mighty river. Let us pray for reconciliation built not on forgetting, but on remembering and repairing. Amen. Amen echoed through the crowd. As Pastor Matthews finished, the choir director raised her hands, and the opening notes of Lift Every Voice and Sing swelled through the park. The familiar, powerful anthem filled the air, sung with heartfelt conviction by the choir and many in the crowd. Lift every voice and sing, till earth and heaven ring with the harmonies of liberty. Pops listened, his eyes closed, the music washing over him. He felt the warmth of the sun, the presence of Leah and Diego beside him, the enduring strength of the willow above. He reached under his shirt and drew out the small, silver locket. It felt cool in his palm. He thought of Martha, of her fierce love and quiet strength. He thought of his father, holding his head high amidst the water cannons. He thought of his cousin Sarah, silenced too soon. He thought of the countless others, known and unknown, who had fought and bled and endured so that he could sit here, today, under this tree. Stony the road we trod, bitter the chastening rod, felt in the days when hope unborn had died. With trembling fingers, Pops opened the locket. Inside, nestled against the engraved words we rise, lay the small, gray pinch of Martha's ashes. He had carried her with him, her memory a source of strength and solace. But today something felt different. Felt like a release, a fulfillment. Yet with a steady beat, have not our weary feet come to the place for which our fathers sighed? As the final verses soared, Pops stood up slowly, walked the few steps to the edge of the shade, and held the open locket aloft. He tilted it gently, letting the soft breeze catch the ashes, lifting them, scattering them into the sunlight, allowing them to mingle with the dust and pollen and the spirit of the place. He wasn't letting Martha go. He was setting her free, here, in this place of struggle and resilience, letting her become part of the ongoing story, part of the roots, part of the rising. He closed the empty locket and returned to his bench, a profound sense of peace settling over him. The choir finished, and a moment of quiet reverence fell before applause broke out. Leah put a hand on his arm, her eyes shining. Diego gave him a respectful nod. Pops looked up at the vast canopy of the willow, its leaves whispering secrets to the wind. He thought about the long arc of history, the slow, often painful bending towards justice. It wasn't a passive process. It required pressure, persistence, the collective weight of countless individuals refusing to accept the status quo. It required tending like a garden, pulling the weeds of hatred, planting seeds of understanding. He smiled, a deep, knowing smile. Justice, like a willow, bends not with weakness, but with the strength to sway entire landscapes. Thank you for watching Pop's powerful story. We hope it resonated and offered value. If you believe these narratives matter, help keep the conversation going. Please like, share this video, and subscribe for more impactful stories that inspire reflection and change.